ultimately technology is a tool that humans invented to help us, but how many times have we been in the other end of that spectrum where we've been working for technology? And so I started to get very, very excited that if you started to infuse this capability of being aware of the emotions, acknowledging the emotions, you'd equip machines, algorithms, technology with a sense of, I know my leader thinks this way, my creator accommodates these signals, therefore I can be better suited to help.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome to AI and the Future of Work, episode 294. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. If you enjoy what we do, please tell a friend and give us a like and a rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. If you leave a comment, I'll be sure to share it in an upcoming episode. We learn from AI thought leaders weekly on this show. And of course, the added bonus, you get one AI fun fact each week. Today's fun fact: Jamie Ballard writes in YouGov about how Americans feel about the role of AI in their careers and in K-12 schooling. According to a YouGov survey of 1,000 US adults, 35% of workers are worried about AI eliminating their jobs or reducing hours and or salaries, and 43% think AI will decrease available jobs in their industry. However, most believe AI will increase automation of routine tasks, 56% of all survey respondents. 51% think that it will increase automation in terms of workplace monitoring, maybe less positive, and 43% say it will increase productivity. Regarding education, most Americans think K-12 schools should incorporate AI usage skills into the curriculum to prepare students. Interestingly, 77% of those surveyed say they do not know anyone, including themselves, who have lost a job or had either their hours or salary cut because of AI. My commentary: the YouGov survey reflects what this community of listeners already feels. I didn't expect that, but it turns out the doomers are, in fact, very much in the minority. And of course, we will link to the full article in today's show notes. Now, shifting to this week's conversation, today's guest is arguably one of the technologists most responsible for using AI to improve how humans work. I can't believe it's taken us 294 episodes to have him on the podcast. Armen Berjikly is a serial entrepreneur and was recently promoted to the CTO role at BetterUp. For those not familiar with BetterUp, it's the human transformation platform that started in 2013. It employs more than 3,000 coaches to help employees live their lives with greater clarity, purpose, and passion by matching them with vetted specialists. Prior to BetterUp, Armen co-founded Motive, which was acquired by BetterUp. He also co-founded Kenjoya, which was acquired by Ultimate Software, a company we've talked about frequently. Armen received his bachelor's in CS and his master's in management science and engineering. We share that common degree from Stanford. Suffice it to say, nobody is better positioned to discuss AI and the future of work. And without further ado, Armen, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the podcast. Let's get started by having you share a bit more about your background and how you got into the space.
Wow, thank you so much, Dan. It's really an honor to be here with you and to share some of these stories with your audience. So thanks in advance for the time today. And we were having a lot of fun even before this conversation. So I think it's going to be a lively and vibrant set of topics that I like to share what's going on. So I'm Armen, and it was interesting to be on the receiving end of that biography because it makes me feel a bit old. But we've been through some great times, Dan, right? Like we've seen an entire generational shift in technology in our working lifetimes. And I'm ever so grateful for that. And also that we get to almost have another pass at that with the AI revolution and get our hands really deep in trying to apply particularly the wisdom that we've gained over these last couple of decades in the space. And so I have been at this intersection of what I would really say is emotion and technology, going all the way back to those Stanford days. It's funny looking back that it feels like there's a through line, that there was some intentionality to it. in terms of where I started and where I ended up, but it felt mostly like just taking the next right step at each point. And back at Stanford, sort of at that turn of the era in the late 90s, the 1900s, it feels scary to say. I worked with a professor called Clifford Nass and Byron Reeves, and they were really pioneering this idea of how our brains were adapting to sort of new media. And I ended up partnering up with them. We did a bunch of research together that was essentially when you create computer actors, or what we would call sort of digital actors in that day, how did they speak about themselves? Did they basically, when you called a IVR system at American Airlines and it said, I didn't understand you, or would it say the system made an error? Could you please repeat yourself? The delta between those two things was actually really fascinating, because what was happening behind the scenes in that research was our brains were adapting to these machines that are obviously not human, but starting to exhibit very human traits. And I'm not even going into like the visuals and the look and feel of avatars and so forth. But the conclusion of all that research was our brains will treat every sort of interaction that's human-like with human assumptions. We'll bring our emotions to it. We won't be rude to computers. We'll be polite. That was one of the titles of the books that Cliff published. And agency was starting to be passed from us to these machines, and all brains adapting to new technology. And so interesting, because that through line followed through in my career, this sort of idea of not just voice or digital actors, but really the language is what's underneath it all. And so that's where I've sort of doubled down. Is I view language as the best sort of capability that humans have developed to express what's going on inside of us, the squishy, the messy, the exciting, the terrifying, and put it out for someone else to figure out. Yes, there's body language as well, but I would say language is even more universal, given its portability and its sort of timelessness. And so I began my path by really creating something called Experience Project, which was a website that really brought people together based on common experiences. And people would come, they'd share experiences that they had, some serious, some lighthearted. They would write stories about those experiences. My first day on the job, or experiencing a loss, or getting a puppy. And we use those experiences in kind of a version of a social network, where instead of who you know leads you to other people it was what experiences you've had led you to other experiences that would create bonds. And what we did with that, at some point it hit about 40 million monthly users, so not a small amount, is we really trying to address commonality between people in shared emotions, shared experiences, all expressed really at that time through language. This is sort of early iterations of the web, very text heavy. And you can kind of start to see from what I said, well, there's a really interesting repository of language being used to express how people feel about their experiences, how that deviates depending on, your background, your demographic, your age, your geography. We choose different words. We choose different phrases, and in between the lines is really, really powerful. And so I started getting really excited as we built Experience Project at what is within this language. If you start to analyze it, could you start to almost work backwards and say, if I see something, like a paragraph of text, could I start to decipher what the emotions are in there, what the experiences are? There's this famous quote that's, in a book, the best thing is what's in between the lines. And we as humans are fantastic, at least compared to some sort of baseline at figuring out, you and I are having coffee, you're saying one thing, but you mean another. Machines have to get good at that to work for us. Machines have to really embrace this idea that humans are emotional creatures, that they say one thing, but they might mean another. And ultimately, technology is a tool that humans invented to help us. But how many times have we been in the other end of that spectrum where we've been working for technology? And so I started to get very, very excited that if you started to infuse this capability of being aware of the emotions, acknowledging the emotions, you'd equip machines, algorithms, technology with a sense of, I know my leader thinks this way, my creator accommodates these signals, therefore I can be better suited to help. And so that then led to a series of companies that I started applying this capability. The first was Kenjoya. I still wear the t-shirt. My kids love the name. It's like, can I join you? I was very proud of that company. We started as a technology company. And we started to say, where could we apply this capability of deciphering emotions in what was unstructured text? And one of our first customers was a company called Genentech, which I think many of us know. And they had initially wanted to use technology to kind of look at consumer conversations around their drugs and their patient communities. And it was expensive. And so they started to come up with some questions about where else could we use this thing that we bought? And they had done an employee voice survey very recently, and they were sitting on that mound of data. If anyone's done one of those, on the other side of it is like hundreds of pages of text as people not only fill out the bubbles, but they write like, hey, here's how you can improve my day. Here's how you can think about the company differently, or management can think about these things to accommodate. And in the past, you'd sit there for a weekend and literally like write notes with a team of people. And guess what? Those people would get tired. Those people would get very biased. You know, if those notes are about you, you tend to interpret them in a certain way, and so on. And so we had this like aha moment where it was like, what if we could apply this technology to sort of the employee world, where there's all these voices that are sort of trapped and they're begging for the world to get better. They're aching to share what's going on in their day to day. And it's getting lost in these like systems that are capturing the information, but not doing anything with them. Maybe not because of maliciousness, but really just benign neglect. The technology wasn't there. The capability wasn't there. And so that's what Kenjoya became, is we became a full employee voice solution. We did the survey part, but really what we were excited about to say is like the multiple choice part can start to shrink. The open-ended part can start to expand, because now you have a technology capability to decipher what are people talking about, how much do they care, what are the emotions around it. And so that took off. It became very successful. We caught the eye of a company called Ultimate Software, which you mentioned. I won't lie. When I first met Ultimate Software in my email, I'm like, is this a fake name company? Like, what is this? But as I had a moment where I remember Googling them and being like, oh my gosh, this is like a multi-billion-dollar, extraordinarily well-run public company. Egg on me. But that was sort of we were in the West Coast and we didn't really see the East Coast companies as well. And so I shared that story just to say, your eyes were opened, and I found a absolute match made in heaven with Ultimate. And so we got merged into Ultimate in a wonderful set of years. The product still lives on. Ultimate got acquired by a private equity company, or started to take private. And at that point, the same group of folks kind of looked at each other and said, we still have some things we want to do, some chapters we want to write in this book. And really what we wanted to do was go from analyzing to acting, doing. And so we created a company called Motive Software, and we said, we'll go from employee voice, where we found some success, but add in some other signals. There's lots of other signals out there in the employee world. There's certainly performance data, there's employee voice data, there's things like Glassdoor, and start to say, if you take multimodal unstructured inputs and you start to combine them with structured inputs, like, how's the company doing objectively, or, how is a team rate their own engagement with their quantitative, you start to get a sense of, I can not only figure out how people are feeling and what are they like thinking about, excited about, worried about, but how is that correlated and connected with outcomes? And how can I use that to prioritize a list of things? Like, if I just know everyone's excited or worried about X, Y, and Z, well, how do I know that Z is more important to tackle than Y if I'm interested in a company that has a, coaching culture or improves their engagement, right? And so we created a system that was multi-channel. We created a system that created prioritization by combining with what we would call business outcomes, and got to know a company called BetterUp as we were doing this. And we had lots of friends at BetterUp. We had a very shared mission that, you could, again, use sort of technology to help people, same way that we had done with Experience Project, same way we've done with Kenjoya and Motive. And for me, the big magical moment was at BetterUp. The conviction is to this triptych of, I want to identify what's going on with a person, with an org, with a function. I then want to transform them through coaching interventions of all types, digital or human. And then I'm going to measure, did that work? And that is like the core DNA of the company. When I heard that, I was like enchanted, honestly, because having been on the other side of creating lots of analytics and trying really, really hard to turn those analytics into things people can do, things people can actually act on without hiring McKinsey or Deloitte to come in and do a multi-million-dollar, effort, but people could actually be equipped within HR teams to change things for the better. I saw that in one house, quote unquote, under one roof at BetterUp, and a conviction that all that should be applied towards human transformation for the better. And so that's when I joined. That was about 3.5 years ago. And it's been a ton of fun. We've had a lot of impact here, I believe, and vice versa. I've been surrounded by some incredible teammates that I'm learning from day to day. So sorry for that long spiel, but it's been a fun journey, and I appreciate the years.
Armen, I had the pleasure of attending Transform, the BetterUp customer event, through great sponsorship from Natalie on your PR team recently, and I was so inspired by the mission and by leadership. And I'd like you to share a little bit more about how you kind of operationalize everything about the ethos that you just described that led to your journey to BetterUp. Some of the things that I heard on stage from you and Alexi, and then since then, having started to use personally the BetterUp tools, I want you to give the audience a better sense of how you take that kind of vision and things that can seem a little bit amorphous and actually turn them into features and a product that's in market and helping so many people today.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because I'd like to try and pull out to my product friends out there, my R&D friends out there, is like, how do you take like lofty generalizations and really bring them into your team? And I was trying to think, when you ask that, one of the areas that I take a lot of pride in with our work here at BetterUp is our really strong embrace of research in the product development process. Again, that starts at that 35,000-foot level, and over the course of this conversation, maybe we can get into some of the details of that. But it's understanding sort of your market, where it's going, especially in these areas of new innovation, AI being what we're most often talking about. What we found is that traditional Gartner hype cycle that takes 4 to 5 years historically is been compressed down to 12 months. Like that whole sort of chart has happened in 12 months. And you can all experience it yourself. Every single listener should probably think of way back when your first interaction with ChatGPT, and your emotions and your feelings then, and your level of trust in the technology, to now. It does feel like a completely different era, but I will tell you, it's not much longer than a year ago. And so we do a lot of research that is purposeful, meaning like we know where we generally want the product to go, and we have some questions we want to answer, and we partner up with leading organizations. In this case, Stanford, we work very closely with to do a lot of our research and figure out, okay, if we're going to build these AI interactions that are going to work hand in hand with our coaching network, trust is so important, right? We have to believe that these things can work. Efficacy is so important. And then figuring out when to use what intervention is so important. So that's what we tasked our research to do. We have some very large efforts that directly pipeline into product decisions. It's not like the research is in a completely different group and does not sort of feed in. And it's not like it's basically following its own charter. We are very deeply connected at the hip. And so that's one thing that I'd really like to say is getting a functional research arm. It doesn't have to be even within your own company. You can partner up with other orgs, but aligning it with your product roadmap so that it answers direct questions. You'd be surprised. I mean, you won't be surprised, but most people will be surprised how often, how rarely that happens, and how often it's just separate efforts that are like, hey, we're publishing this research, this is connected. Similarly with innovation on the other side, you're thinking about your future efforts. We have a studios team that's brilliant. They think about where we're going 5 and 10 years from now. That being disconnected would also be unhelpful. And they they work with me directly, a part of my team. So they know where the roadmap is going, and they're basically trying to figure out the Lego blocks. So that's one side. The other side are two other points I'd make here, which is one, a lot of credit to Alexi Robichaud, our CEO, a great sort of product CEO. What he's been masterful at is really focusing on this idea of a mental model. And I've never used those words as much as when I came to BetterUp, and I don't wrap my head around like, what does this mean? What does this mean? But Alexi's sense is the product is going nowhere. No product is going anywhere without a sense that the user gets the mental model of what this is supposed to do. And I think we often in entrepreneurship rush through that. We're like, oh, they'll get it. I get it. I'll just build it. They will come. And so many entrepreneurs, look at the App Store. How many percent of the apps are never downloaded, sadly? I call it the avenue of broken dreams, right? Hundreds and thousands of hours of effort have been lovingly put into each one of these apps, and one tiny percent of them is actually getting downloaded, and even smaller percent is getting actively used. And a lot of what's happening is people scratching their heads. The mental model never clicked with the user. Like, I know I need to do this with this app, and it's kind of like this other thing that I do either in the real world or in the digital world. And so very specifically, we've had multiple product efforts here that have started, nation efforts. We got them through alpha, we got them into early beta, and we're like, you know what? We're not feeling the mental model here. Like, it's not working, it's not clicking. Like, let's go back and start over. And we know that it's worth going slow to get that model right in your head before you go off and invest all your time in building it. That building part is fast once you get the model right. And I think that sort of discipline, it's courageous. And I've loved seeing it. I've loved being a part of it, following Alexi's lead. And then the third thing I'm going to mention here in terms of what's novel, at the conference that you're mentioning, we brought a bunch of our customers And on stage, on our main keynote, it hit me hard that the diversity of customers that spoke. We had a Google, technology, selling to technology. You kind of expect that in a way. The next one was Hilton, which is a hospitality company, and we talked at the beginning of this about how we can use AI to help large swaths of humanity. Hilton's a massive employer. They have a ton of frontline employees, hourly employees, desk employees, people who are not attached to a computer, who are on schedules and shifts. And being able to work with them is very gratifying because there's a whole different set of challenges and obviously a much larger population than your traditional sort of tech worker, knowledge worker. And then the third group we had on stage was the U.S. government, effectively, right? It was the Air Force and a general. It was like a 3-star general. And what was fascinating to me about that is the government is not really often considered first in building startup companies as your customer of choice for many reasons. But the profound power of one of the largest employers in the world, certainly. But also, when I was walking around that conference, meeting with customers, talking to teammates, seeing our US government customers walking around in their regalia and with the gravitas they bring, not only as individuals, but what they represent, right? I mean, they represent safety, security, sort of the tip of the veritable spear of United States policy and sort of our place in the world. It sends a message to all other customers. It sends a message to everyone there that, wow, you're thinking about that level of performance where it is life or death, certainly for our military friends and their use of our product, but also what it means for building enterprise software at that scale. And so I was just really gratified. I shared that with my team instantly about like how proud I felt to feel like a diverse set of customers. We're not just super serving one niche or even the easiest niche. And the challenge it brings into your product development process to imagine those different use cases and really, you don't want to be jack of all trades. You want to be expert at certain things. And in this case, what you'd say is all the through line through that is being able to deliver the change humans deserve, regardless of their circumstances. That's a through line. And as a product person, as a technologist, can we find the best technologies and the methods to try and pursue that, which I believe AI has given us a bunch of breakthroughs. So those are a few things I wanted to note out that I think are notable about our particular process here. Appreciate the question.
Of course. Just before I go on, I used the wrong name to refer to that amazing BetterUp event that Armen and I have been talking about. It's called Uplift. So for listeners, please go look it up. I think a lot of the talks are recorded, but just incredible content. So Armen, there's this popular narrative that the thought process that you can humanize work with technology is an oxymoron. Like the more like non-human intervention, tech-driven intervention into the workplace, like that's at odds with those of us who have, spent careers thinking about work tech.
Yeah.
And you and I see it a different way. I mean, you've had a career infusing technology to build communities and build people up and humanize work. What would you say to those who feel like, the way to humanize work is not to introduce more bots or automation?
Yeah, there's so many reactions to that. But I really do want to harp on your first point, which is sort of you have to tap into the values of the individuals you're working with and the companies that you're working with, and just make sure that your first statement is true, because there can be people that are pursuing technology as ways to displace or replace humans, and unabashedly so. And there are places where you could attempt to do that. You can think about like self-driving cars as a pretty good example. But I think of myself, our teams here, and our approach completely orthogonal to that, which is, I go back to the very first decks that we put together when we were pitching the AI initiatives was we are going to use this technology ultimately to increase human connection. That will be the net result. And we work with companies and, they have lots of employees. And can we find impediments that have been blocking things like a coaching culture, that have been blocking things like internal mentorship by using technology, right? So technology isn't the end goal and it isn't the binary solution, but can it work hand in hand with thoughtful efforts that will ultimately yield this more interconnection? That's what I did with Experience Project, and as you pointed out, and I have the hundreds, if not thousands, of letters of people saying that this worked so well for me. It was life-changing. So I'm very, very confident and optimistic you can do that. In particular, when we think about the workplace and the changes that AI is bringing, or early on, I remember talking to Josh Bersin, one of our most celebrated analysts in this space, and he was like, "Man, Armen, this AI wave." He's like, "I've been through a lot of these waves, and I'm usually, one step back. Got to watch, how it develops." He's like, "This one is a freight train," and that was sobering to me because I was like, "Okay, I certainly feel that way. I'm biased. I've been working on this space for a long time, and I want another spring or summer of AI." But to hear someone like Josh basically like, "Hey, it's coming," and then I talk to tons and tons of customers every week. And this idea that HR is truly going to be revolutionized is replete. I think that we all should, feel like this is something we can safely lean into, that it's a new reality. And every time a technology wave of that ilk has come through the workforce, like let's say management or humans or sort of the nature of the org, it hasn't gone away. What has happened is some tasks on the lower end of the spectrum have been displaced, where we're like, okay, we now have a technology that can do things better than we could, and that we didn't really even want to do that. And I can focus on more and more human traits. And what we found is, I talked about that accelerated AI adoption curve over the last year. It's already changed what people need and want from, in particular, managers, right? And so I'm going to use this as an example to say, where in the 1800s, or the 1900s, management was, did you show up at 8 o'clock? I'm watching you walk through that door. I'm watching how many widgets you produce, right? And over time, every time a technology came out, the management kind of moved into a higher rank, or the focus of the employees moved into a higher rank of work. And what we're seeing in that microcosm of managers in this case is things like tracking performance or managing deadlines. People are saying, cool, use technology for that. AI can do that. I didn't really like when my manager did that anyways. What I want from my manager is motivation. I want them to listen to my feedback. I want them to recognize me. I don't want a machine to recognize me. It doesn't mean anything to me. I want constructive feedback and non-technical coaching, right? And so sort of what we call that is like the deeply human skills of the workforce is becoming more important as some of the more basic elements, technology is starting to do a better job at that than us. And so what that is a sort of microcosm of what we would call a braid, right? Certain things are better with the machine, certain things are better with human. One doesn't replace the other. There's an interplay. And so when you build these capabilities, in our world, we think about them from the get-go as, how can they work hand in hand with our coach network? This AI experience, for example, that you're about to have, that is a role-playing, chat, really helpful. But when you pick up the thread with a human coach, will they know what you were role-playing? How did it go? What were you concerned about, et cetera? So they can focus in their time on the elements that really either you need specific human-oriented help on, or want to dig deeper on, and vice versa. And we just feel this is a constant thread. We built it into our product to work that way. And our research supports this as well, that people really crave a combination of AI and human, or technology and human. And the preferences are very clear as to like when people want to work with technology, when they want to work with human. But not only is our emotional stays here, but also our research shows nobody wants a 0-1 situation, particularly in the world, for example, of coaching and personal development. Very much the majority of folks are like, please, I want both of these types of experiences, but help me figure out which is the right one. And we use our science for that.
So having used the product, I can vouch for the fact that, I get that there's amazing AI on the back end. Like, it's the best example of a product that doesn't feel like it's bludgeoning you over the head with like LLM parlor tricks. Like, it's just infused into this really natural experience. Could you talk about how you and your team think about applying AI to create, this very intuitive user experience?
Yeah, thank you for that. And it's been very intentional work that we've been trying to blend these. So I use the word braid. It's a joke. Like, I literally had my daughter make a whole bunch of braids and hand out to our team. Like, we love that term here because, the braid has 3 or more threads. In our case, I'll tell you the 3 that we are weaving. One is the human experience, right? We have this massive coaching network, experts, generalists, all leadership development type things. And that's one thread. The second thread is our growing portfolio of these AI experiences. I mentioned one earlier, like a role-playing experience. We have lots of these that could just be personalized digital learning, all the way through to scenarios and challenges that are typical to your work and experience and tailored to you, right? And so you've got these digital experiences, and then you got to figure out that any given person at any given point in their career in life is facing a certain set of challenges. Those change. They're highly dynamic. They're not, one at a time. Sadly, life tends to throw a lot of things at us, and so you have to be dynamic, adaptive, and perceptive as a software builder to say, like, well, if I'm trying to solve that problem, I need to know what the problem is or the opportunity is, and then choose from a like sort of a tool belt that, as I hope I made the case in the last question, needs to draw upon digital and human experiences to really be both fulfilling and engaging and also efficacious and satisfying, and bringing this like larger term picture of increasing the humanness and human connectedness. And so that third thread for us after the AI experiences and the human experiences is the science to say, well, what is the thing that we should bring right now? Not only should it be AI or human, but which of those experiences should we draw upon? If it's a human experience, should it be a peer circle that you get together for half an hour with a bunch of managers at your company? Should it be a coach that you talk to as an expert in communication skills? Or should it be, let's say, a role-playing chat that's set up for you to have this difficult conversation with your manager tomorrow about, a vacation that's coming up, something like that. And so these three things, when you start by thinking that I'm going to have these three threads and I'm going to braid them, it influences what you build, because every one of the experiences is not built myopically. It's built with the idea that, okay, it's going to have this input, it's going to have this output, it's going to be part of this journey, it's evergreen. And I think already that changes the nature of how you build products. And I'm flattered that you've had the experience that it felt like a continuum, it felt personalized, and it felt like, okay, the right thing, this is a very overused phrase, but the right thing is happening to me at the right time. And I can trust that this organization has science and real world data that is guiding where I'm spending my time. And then I'm verifying that by feeling like I'm making progress, seeing tangible progress, in this case, in my career, et cetera. So I think it's like an intentionality, and then having a tool belt, and then really validating it with your data that is it working the way that you expect it to.
We both talk frequently about the future of work being the fusion of what the best of machines can do combined with the best of humans. But I got to ask the question, given what BetterUp does, is there any version of the future in which the role of the human coach is replaced or significantly supplemented by potentially an AI-based coach?
So, I mean, in the case of replacing, I think no. As again, history and the progress of technology has shown us, the interplay of technology with human is that it takes pieces of the pie that progressively become easier to automate or less interesting and tackles that completely. And then our expectations of what we want adapt, and we raise the bar. It's not a fixed pie. So our expectation on the other side is like, cool, if something is doing this type of, deadline management, it's not like my job and my sort of scope stays the same. The ceiling goes up of now what I can possibly achieve, right? We believe in limitless human potential. We want everyone to realize it. And I think that's one of the core precepts in that question is we don't have a hard cap. And therefore, it's not a matter of erosion. It's really a matter of, I think, expansion and potential and freeing up. And I don't think that that's just me as an optimist or an unabashed technologist saying that, because I do think I'm also a humanist, and I just feel like there's no telling where we can go, and these tools as they come online should give us the capability to solve long-standing problems that really in the past were kind of blocking us from doing even more cool and important and interesting and compelling and, key point, human things. And I mentioned some examples earlier about how that expectation is coming up for managers, where it's like, okay, now I can expect you to give me better coaching. Now I can expect you to give me more meaningful feedback, because you're not spending your day, measuring who gave me a data clock or whatever. So I don't think it's a 0-1 displacing game. And certainly from the way we're developing it, it is very much a interplay between it. That means that our research needs to continue to hone in and granular on where are appetites, because you want people to be interested to use things, and then where is efficacy in the relationship between human and AI. And we have copious amounts of figuring out, okay, in these scenarios or with this background, this group of people is more comfortable working with AI to develop themselves, and then this group of people that wants to work with human. And then that changes. It's not like because of your demographic, you'll always want an AI experience. We're very, very savvy to the fact that both emotionally as well as efficacy wise, you're going to want to have an interplay. So my short answer is I don't see a zero sum game. I don't see this as, a matter of time that the AI becomes so human, like that it can replace the human. I also see that the expectations of people adapt and their appetite for what they want and need from folks around them changes. And I'll give one more example here before I leave this question, which is there's this idea of sympathy and empathy, right? Which is, someone told me this just yesterday that, oh, I typed into ChatGPT that I, had a flat tire and it said, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I hope your day wasn't ruined, something like that, right? And they were trying to use that as an example of like, look, like it empathized with me. Oh my gosh, like humans' days are numbered. And I was like, big smile on my face. I'm like, I'm so glad that the machine isn't patently offensive anymore because it would have been in the past. So like we've made a little bit of progress, right? But we all know, not just from our emotional experiences ourselves, but from our research, that a machine demonstrating empathy or, God forbid, sympathy towards you is infuriating because it's a machine. It can't feel those emotions, and it actually demeans your human emotions when a machine tries to replicate that or feels, quote unquote, sorry for you. And so there's a hard line where a machine trying to act human actually makes you really, really, really recoil as a person. And we found the highest efficacy of these AI experiences is when it becomes abundantly clear. It explains that it's AI. It explains the limited things that it's going to help you do, even in this given interaction, and then does those things and moves on, as opposed to I'm your buddy and I'm here to feel with you and help you through every possible thing in your life. Those feel like a siren song, but in reality, they very quickly fizzle out because you have an internal, what would you call it, like a pointer that goes, uh-oh, this is not satisfying. And for these reasons, both emotionally and logically, I'm antagonized by this. And so there is actually a hard line where I feel like the technology cannot stray into certain human areas. And that's really good and reassuring and exciting for us because it gives us lots of room to play with, but also tells us that we can develop with the mentality I started with, that AI and human can work together.
I referenced in the fun fact some research from YouGov about attitudes toward AI in the workplace, and you referred to some primary research done at BetterUp. What have the primary insights been that you've derived from that research into kind of AI trends in the workplace?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I missed the last part.
Yeah, you referred to research from BetterUp is published. Just curious to know, relative to maybe like what I shared in the fun fact, what you learned at BetterUp from polling presumably your customers or prospects about their attitudes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. We have this profundity of research that we do, and I'm going to like pick one vignette of some of our very recent and heretofore unpublished, but I believe by the time you're listening to this, it will be published. And it's something we're calling pilots and passengers, that's being a little bit cute about it. And here's how I'll summarize it. Like, as we've been looking at the workforce, in particular with like this focus on AI over the last year, we've seen there's sort of these two batches of user types. One, we're calling pilots. And what typifies a pilot here is someone that when they're faced with technology change, like today, the technology change is AI, 10 years from now, who knows what, the technology will be. 10 years ago, it was other things, right? It was data science, right? But they view technology change and just change in general, quite frankly, with two really critical traits. One, they feel high agency, and two, they feel optimism. The agency means like, I have this new tool at hand. I feel like I can take it and make it do things that I want it to do. And optimism, of course, we know what that means. Like, I feel like it can make the world and my world better. And then this other group is called passengers. They have the exact inverse, right? They feel low agency. They feel like sort of almost victimized by these new tools and the change that's rotting on them. And they have low optimism because it's like, those two things tend to go hand in hand. I can't control what I'm doing. I'm a victim of it. Therefore, sort of, I'm kind of bummed about where this is going. I only see sort of dark clouds and negativity. And these two groups are very, very clear. And what's interesting, if you're, in the world of trying to build stronger organizations, is these pilots, they're not just like fun, and like positive people. With particular focus on AI, they use AI 4 times more at work. They're excited about the future. They're thriving in their roles. They are 4 times more productive, and they're 3 times more likely to stay. Right. So, all compared to these passengers. And this is just emerging from our study on like trust and approach to, again, AI. And so you want more pilots, regardless. Even if you're a teammate, you're like, I want my pilot teammates, man. They're just like feeling great in this world. And they make me feel great to be around them. And here's the problem: only about 28% of people, very precise, are pilots. So your vast majority of folks are passengers. And it's a $10 trillion question of how we can make more pilots. And that 10 trillion comes from our friends at Accenture that sort of said, if everyone had the embrace of this new set of technologies in the industry, well, what would we unlock in terms of economic value? And it's that really, really large number. And so you look at this and you go, what can I do about it? I want more pilots. They're the minority, and we keep pushing on our research and go, okay, like, well, how can we change that dial? And it turns out, I was speaking about managers earlier by no accident. It's really where the action is that if your manager of a team is a pilot, right? Again, high agency, high optimism, it's 3 times more likely their individual contributors or their reports are also pilots. You have this huge influence. We always talk about the manager's influence at the point of inflection in a company, and it's fascinating to your question to see the research bear these things out. And of course, we could validate ourselves. If your manager is feeling these things, you're very likely to feel these things, and vice versa. And so, well, how do you make managers pilots? In our world, coaching is a very powerful thing. We've seen just a quarter, basically. You can shift this agency and optimism massively up, which gives them this leg up in terms of how they're going to interact with not only technology, but have all their impact on teams. And so this is the kind of thing that we go, all right, well, if we're interested in manager enablement, well, what are the sort of groups of folks? What are the attributes of those folks, particularly in the behaviors and mindsets area where I talk about agency and optimism? I didn't talk about like, they have a 3.2 on engagement versus a 3.1. That's a lagging indicator. You got to really go to like how people act in the moment, what their behavior is, what their sort of calibration and their valence is. We've talked so much from the beginning of this about emotion and these deeply human skills. They drive our behaviors. And I feel like there's that through line, hopefully, of if a technology wants to help people, it has to acknowledge people. And people are a combination of thought and feeling and logic. And so we go to that mindset. We figure out where are the areas like agency and optimism that are driving this distinction that could create an embrace of the technology that leads to good things. And then how can we help change and develop people in a positive way so those behaviors and mindsets go in the direction that will lead them to greater fulfillment. And, of course, happy people lead to happy companies, and off you go.
So I've got to get you off the hot seat, but not without answering one last question for me. And this is the most important one. So take kind of your life's work out to its natural conclusion.
Yeah.
Let's say we're back here and let's say, 8 to 10 years having a version of this conversation, and all of these capabilities that you've helped commercialize are ubiquitous. How is the world of work different when these technology-enabled experiences make it easier for us to be coached and find connections and kind of celebrate our humanity? But like, what's the net impact on the world and on the world of work?
Yeah, I mean, I can. I was bouncing when you asked that question, right? Because I get really excited to think about, the privilege we all have in this space, Dan, you and I, and the folks listening to this, is that we can make these dreams a reality, right? We now have the tools to do so. I mean, AI has advanced our ability to code and realize technology with a massive leap forward. So, it's not just fantasy to think about these things. That's the first thing that makes me think is like, okay, we can imagine something and then we can make it happen. And I think about it on 2 vectors. One, personal, right? So, I was born here. My parents were not. They were immigrants, in their home country. My dad was a civil engineer. My mom was a chemist. They moved here. They had to make money. My mom worked at JCPenney catalog, and my dad became a real estate broker. And they did what they needed to do to provide us a safe and happy childhood, but they took a huge level down in their dreams and their aspirations personally to enable the next generation. And I get very emotional thinking about tools like we build at BetterUp, and all the other sort of career enablement advancement tools, if they had that little bit of coaching to help them have confidence, to help them plan a career trajectory, they could have, I think, gotten to the part of the matrix where not only were they creating a great future for their children, but they were achieving their own fulfillment as well and not feeling like they traded off. And I think so many people would relate to that when they think of the previous generations or their own life and the trade-offs that we have to make. So one, I feel like, we have tools. And one of the great purposes of technology is to take things that are limited to just a few, right? Like think about executive coaching 10 years ago. Who got that? Just a tiny little group of people who probably needed it the least, right? And we're starting to use technology to bring it to larger and larger populations, and the benefits then get extended. So, one world is that, very personally, I feel it. And then the other side is, back to the data. We know the benefits of, my world coaching. It's dramatic and it helps everyone, but it really helps the people who need to be helped. And so we have more unpublished research that we're just showing that workplace well-being over the last half decade has gone down pretty seriously. Even like sort of going pre-COVID to now, and then we'd all be like, yeah, that's probably right. It has gone down. It's gone down even more for women than men. It's gone down even more so for women of color. And so you go like, right? We have not only a bad trend, but the trend is like exacerbated for traditionally disadvantaged populations. And then we look and we see when we have our interventions in place, it has a disproportionate positive impact. And so, the BetterUp impact on those groups is even more dramatic in restoring wellness and actually exceeding where it was, right? And so I don't say that to just focus on BetterUp's work, but it is more to say that the world will continue to create these earthquakes, all kinds of societal change, technical change, economic change. It will tend to exacerbate in populations that have already struggled with it. And so when you think about these tools and they bring something that was limited to a few and had a known benefit and can get it to more folks, I feel it both personally. I'm like, how could my life and my sort of background have been impacted by this and the people I love? And I think about it in sort of my responsibility as a technologist, that we have to better society with these tools. We have to really apply to these long-standing problems that in the past we said, oh, those were too hard, too expensive, too challenging to fix. Well, technology is attacking all of those sort of statements and saying, nope, you now have a way. And it's up to you as an R&D person or a product leader or a company leader to figure out how this new set of tools line up to solve these problems that we as humans should and have a need and now an opportunity capability to solve. So I get very excited because that's how the world looks to me. And that's how I feel my responsibility in my career and background really turning into something for good.
Armen, this one's been fascinating. I realized we only got through a small fraction of the topics we had planned, but you know what? Your energy is infectious. I love your passion. Keep doing what you do.
Thank you so much, Dan. It's been a pleasure to get to chat, and I appreciate your audience.
And I'm going to insist that you come back and we continue the discussion, okay?
Let's do part 2. All right.
You bet. Armen, before I let you go, where can the audience learn more about you and the good work your team's doing?
I would check out just BetterUp and take a look at the research that I've been talking about, this pilots and passengers thing. It's going to be betterup.com/pilots -passengers. And I think that you'll learn a lot from checking through it. It's a really interesting insight into how AI is impacting the workplace, what you can do about it. And it's presented in a very human approach that we all can relate to and explain to others and feel some sense of agency over.
Great work. We're all rooting for you and the team to succeed.
Much appreciated.
Well, that is all the time we have for this week on AI and the future of work. As always, I'm your host, Dan Turchin from PeopleRain. And of course, we're back next week with another fascinating guest.